Good morning, friends. Today's talk is called the title is uh, the Liberation of the Dhamma. I think is what I titled it, but it follows the two most recent talks at Crossover Meditation Center this past Saturday and last evening. Saturday's talk was on the Dhamma-Viharin Sutta, subtitled "Being One with the Dhamma," and last night's talk, the Dhammannu Sutta, one who dwells in the Dhamma. And they're similar suttas with a few distinctions. And I'll cite a line from, or the closing paragraph from the Dhamma-Viharin Sutta. But both of these suttas talk to the really the utter simplicity of the Dhamma, but also the necessity of being well focused on what the Buddha taught and to understand what he taught and what he didn't teach. And this is an underlying theme throughout the Buddha's teaching. In fact, the more I understand what the Buddha actually taught, and as importantly, what he didn't teach, the more I realize that the subtle brilliance of an awakened mind and how he taught. And that's included in both of these suttas. But the implication there, and again, this is an underlying theme throughout what the Buddha taught during his lifetime, as preserved in the Sutta Pitaka, is this constant need to adapt, accommodate, and embellish the Buddha's Dhamma, even while he was there teaching in front of you. So it often came up. Sometimes you can hear the questions directly, but in both of these suttas, you can see the underlying theme present during the Buddha's Sangha of what it is and what it isn't. And so both of these suttas obviously came later in the Buddha's teaching career, where the original Sangha had established a very well-founded understanding of what the Buddha was teaching, and yet there's still influences from outside the Sangha. The Buddha and his Sangha didn't live in a cloister. They were involved in the community. They went out every day on their alms rounds. They talked to people. Other spiritual teachers came through, and they were influenced by them both before they encountered the Buddha and even during the time when they were part of the Buddha Sangha. So there was always an influence of other types of teachings, or even things that people decided just in their own minds about how they should practice the Dhamma. So the Buddha was very clear that the heartwood of the Dhamma is an eightfold path. And it is the entire eightfold path as a complete practice that brings true liberation from the problem of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Let me just read this line from the Dhamma-Viharin Sutta. Lay down, folks. Come on, lay down. He loves getting in on the show. This is the concluding paragraph. The rest of the sutta is about those that engage in just about anything other than integrating proper meditation practice into their Dhamma as a Dhamma practice. In other words, they might be into scriptural study. They might be into chanting or other types of ritualistic practice. But unless you establish a meditation practice, unless you establish seclusion, meaning you take some time separated from the entanglements of the world and simply sit, there's no way that you can develop the rest of the practice. But as important is understanding the entire eightfold path and integrating it into our lives. And so this concluding paragraph in that sutta, the Dhamma-Viharin Sutta, is the Buddha's words: "I have taught you about the person who is keen on study, keen on description, keen on recitations, keen on thinking, and on those that dwell in the Dhamma. Whatever a teacher should do out of sympathy for you and seeking your welfare, I have done for you. Over there are roots of trees and empty dwellings. Don't be mindless. Don't fall into regret. Practice right meditation and develop meditative absorption. That last meditative absorption is referring to the jhanas. And that's probably a good subject to use here, because the jhanas themselves, even people that have heard of the jhanas, usually hear them in a way as very, very advanced meditative states that are only achieved by a very, very select few of meditators. And of course, the Buddha didn't teach anything like that. In fact, the question came up last night, not related to this, but about, I'll talk about that in a little while, about things sounding rather elitist. And that's something that would certainly be elitist. A meditation practice within the Buddha's Dhamma that is only achievable by a very few special practitioners. The Buddha never taught anything like that. He taught an eightfold path that any human being could undertake and develop liberation from the ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And so those levels of meditative absorption that the Buddha mentions here are ordinary levels of ever deepening meditation that's achieved by everyone who develops shamatha vipassana meditation within the framework of the Eightfold Path. Now, getting back to the idea of a well-focused sangha, the Dhammannu Sutta that I taught last night, both of these are posted up on the website, is a rather elaborate exposition of ever more subtle levels of refined mindfulness within the framework of the Eightfold Path. And a question came up from Helen. It was a great question, where in towards the end of that sutta, the Buddhist teaching about the distinctions between different individuals. And in this particular reference, the distinction was between those that have an understanding of the Dhamma and do not listen attentively to the teachings, and those that do. And the line that in question that came up is that those that are one with the sense of the Dhamma will disapprove of those that are listening inattentively to the Dhamma, and will approve of those that listen attentively to the Dhamma. And so the question that came up is that sounded awful judgmental about disapproving of someone who is not listening attentively to the Dhamma. Now, again, that comes after a long exposition of someone who has developed the Dhamma to a certain point, but is no longer listening attentively to that. And so it sounds like, from one point of view, that you're singling a person out for disapproval and dismissing that person. But taken in the entire context, it's simply a teaching tool to understand someone who is fully engaged in the Dhamma and will likely, based on their way of practice, develop liberation from ignorance of Four Noble Truths, liberation from stress and suffering, and one that won't. And now referring to last night's sutta, the Dhammannu Sutta, it's simply describing how a well-developed Dhamma practice looks like and feels like. And so it teaches a progression of these ever subtle levels of application of the broad Eightfold Path. And as we continue to develop the Eightfold Path, our mindfulness, this is why I refer to it as refined mindfulness, our mindfulness becomes ever more refined and ever more well integrated into the Eightfold Path. Excuse me. So ultimately, what we're developing through all 8 factors of the Eightfold Path culminates in the first factor of right view. And right view is a mind that is well framed by the entire Eightfold Path and understands the Buddha's teachings on what right view means. What the experience of right view is that is a mind that has a profound and penetrative understanding of the nature of stress and has abandoned all craving after and clinging to views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And so it is this simple and well-focused Dhamma practice. I think the other thing that I want to talk about, excuse me, sorry about that. It's said that the Buddha gave over 84,000 discourses. That's a lot. No one really knows for sure. But when you read just the preserved teachings of the Buddha in the Sutta Pitaka, the second book of the Pali Canon, there is an awful lot of material there. And unless you understand the entire context of what the Buddha taught, even reading just the suttas can become rather confusing. But it's important to understand that most of those suttas were taught situationally and arose from questions that were asked directly of the Buddha, or something that he noticed about a certain group of practitioners and where they were getting off track. So much of the Buddha's teaching is being very specific about what it is. Come here, lay down. Let me finish this talk. Lay down, Loads. Being very specific about what his Dhamma is, and also being very specific about what it isn't. And this is an important underlying theme of the Buddha's Dhamma, is to understand from the point of view of right view what that encompasses, but also as important is what is not right view. And how do we know that? That's why the Buddha taught an eightfold path. That's why it is I think I was going to use the word paramount to integrate the eightfold path. It's more than that. If we're not practicing an eightfold path, the Buddha referred to the eightfold path as the heartwood of the Dhamma. If we're not practicing an eightfold path as a complete practice, as a framework for our Dhamma practice, the Buddha teaches we're simply not practicing what the Buddha taught. And so I could use that phrase and say, if we're not practicing a fully integrated eightfold path, meaning that we understand what each aspect of that is, including what right mindfulness and right meditation is, that's only two of the factors. We're simply not practicing Buddhism if we want to say that Buddhism is what the Buddha taught. Of course, what has developed in the 2,600 years since the Buddha's passing, and as we can see through many of the suttas, what was common during the Buddha's time, what is often called Buddhism today, and what was often called simply Dhamma practice back during the Buddha's time, was not necessarily what the Buddha taught. And that's an important distinction, that the more that I practice what an awakened human being taught, following the many years of practicing modern Buddhism and becoming more frustrated and more confused about what I was teaching, the more necessary I see that integrating the eightfold path is both the heartwood of the Dhamma, but it's the only way to understand what the Buddha taught and what he didn't teach, again, which is an underlying theme throughout the Buddha's teaching. It's something that is often ignored. There's such a compulsive and almost gleeful desire to find more things and call them Buddhist practice and justify engaging in those things, which makes it a very, very complicated practice. So this is something we talk about often at Crossover Meditation Center. The Buddha taught a very simple and direct practice. And because it challenges all of our views rooted in ignorance, it can seem very difficult at times, sometimes even very harsh. And that's why I always tell people to be very gentle with yourself and be very gentle with the Dhamma. But also that it is a very specific teaching, and it does not accommodate any adaptations or embellishments, because then the authenticity of the Buddha's teachings is lost. But when the authenticity of the Buddha's teachings is paramount, and maintaining that authenticity is paramount in a practitioner's mind, and this is really what the heart of these last two suttas, but you could say almost every sutta, is getting at, is to recognize what is the Dhamma and recognize what is not the Dhamma, to recognize what is there and to recognize what is not there, and to hold in mind, to take true refuge in the Buddha's Dhamma means to understand what the Buddha's Dhamma is and to practice that with the exclusion of other things as a Dhamma practice. And so then I would, just to finish this talk, it does sound very exclusive. And it was brought up last night that it sounds, to some minds, it could sound almost elitist. But all that it is practicing, all that it is developing an understanding of the distinction between what the Buddha taught and what he didn't teach. And that is not elitist, it's simply common sense. And a perfect example, and I talked about this last night, is the Buddha, when he left the palace, when he left his father's kingdom and went out seeking understanding, the first thing he did is he cut off his hair, he threw away his royal robes and put on robes made of rags. And for the next 45 years, he lived that way. He could have, very quickly after he awakened, came back into that lifestyle and adorned himself like many of the spiritual teachers did during his day, adorned themselves with the trappings of recognition and power, much like many people do today. But he died in those same rags 45 years later as he did when he first set out from his father's kingdom. There was nothing elitist. There was nothing that excluded anybody from engaging in his Dhamma. But there was a very profound teaching on a distinction between what he taught and what other people taught. And that distinction is what these two suttas teach. And that distinction is as important, maybe even more important today, to understand that if we're going to be practicing Buddhism as the Buddha taught it, it's a very simple and direct practice. It's preserved in the Sutta Pitaka. It's preserved on my website. And it's what I teach. And if we're, again, just to emphasize the point, if we're going to practice what a Buddha taught, we need to practice what a Buddha taught. And that is still possible today. So that's today's talk. I hope you found some benefit from this talk. And if you did, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. Thank you. Peace.